Negative influence of social media is what's driving the uneducated young people. No child grows up, they're born in the world and grows up and says, I'm just going to be this person. I'm going to carry a knife. They're very influential by peers and environments. In a Caribbean household, a generational trauma would be grandparents being too harsh on their kids, disciplining them. You get hit, you go to your room, you cry, and that's it. Learned behaviour is a massive thing.
Welcome to another episode of the Leading Communities podcast, a platform where we help develop discussions on topics vital to local communities, offering insights from both leadership perspective and the community's viewpoint. Join us as we explore the issues, stories and experiences that shape our communities and inspire change. Malachi Nunez is a behaviour mentor and director of Ambitious Lives CIC, a youth service provider for disadvantaged young people with challenging behaviour. They're supported by the National Lottery and the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner. Now featured in Love Brum's Hidden Heroes campaign, Malachi draws on his personal experiences to help others turn their challenges into strengths, as he has done. One of his biggest aims at present is to deter young people away from knife crime. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing the impact of social media on young people, exploring the concept of generational trauma and examining effective ways to address it, as well as addressing the urgent issue of knife crime, exploring its impact on communities and discussing strategies to tackle this critical issue. Thank you for joining me, Malachi.
Thank you.
So let's start off with your own experiences and how that has helped you to develop Ambitious Lives CIC. Just tell us a little bit about the experiences you've had.
What were the kind of main drivers for me to, be in the position I am is having that relatable life experience, and that goes across the board, whether it's to do with underrepresented communities, being a young boy, being in school, being undiagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, having those additional needs but not being recognised. Also coming from, you have poverty-driven communities where it's not easy just to have that pot of money in the family where you can just start up a business. You see the older people in your family working hard, wanting to be something. But there's a lot of barriers, a lot of red tape, especially when it was like getting a job may seem simple to a lot of people, but getting a job for me, even though I've got a lot of skills, it was just a lot of barriers to getting a job. So there's a lot of self-reflection and being in the wrong place at the wrong time, associated with the wrong crowds. All those things can hinder you. So all those experiences tie into what's going on now and like serving the purpose of what Ambitious Lives does. Okay.
So from your point of view, how have you overcome some of those issues just on a personal level?
So at a personal level, I would say managing my ADHD, it wasn't a label at that time. It wasn't really something they've investigated, or all I remember was going to speech and therapy session. And even that wasn't really much of a help. So it was about starting from the home. So my mum, she was very proactive in helping me manage my ADHD for too much energy. How do we regulate that energy? And also my disabled sister who had cerebral palsy. So me growing up, I grew up as a young carer. So those kind of things put a real foundation at home of nurturing, caring, understanding, patience. And those kind of things is what, I gained from growing up on a personal level, which brings those, I didn't realize till I got older, those things, there's kids mirroring that type of lifestyle growing up. And, I had the nurturing from my mum, from the home, to kind of let that flower grow, and that's who I've become.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, you've for lack of better wording, then created a home in the form of Ambitious Lives CIC for young people who might be facing similar issues. We'll come back to that in a little while when we start talking about some of the lifestyle choices that may be leading some people to. But let's just take a look at social media for a moment. What are your thoughts in terms of how it's influencing behaviour and mental health of young people today?
Social media, I mean, everything has its pros and cons. And we clearly can see the pros, but what I see and like to address and just create the awareness and also give a perspective for young people to see that the negative influence of social media is what's driving the uneducated young people. So if you have grown up with nothing but social media and you haven't got positive role models or positive influences around you, social media is going to become that influence, that role model, in the form of a phone that you have every day, morning, night. So you're taking in that information, and unfortunately, you know, companies that be, whether it's, you know, sports brands, whether it's music, there's a negative influence, and the young people are taking it on board as if that's their dads, their uncles, you know, they even, if young people ain't growing up with their parents, that's their parent now. So whatever they hear and see is, they don't question it because there's no conversation. It's just they've been told and dictated to, this is that, and then they believe it instead of having a conversation with a human being, and, you know, you can have a reasoning about it. So that's how influential social media is.
How do you feel it can be tackled then in terms of sort of just challenging its influence?
It starts from, first of all, I always, when I speak to parents, I always tell them to educate themselves on the apps. Whatever apps your child has, pays a lot of attention to, get to know the app, understand it, be in the world of where the child is, otherwise you'll lose that child mentally. So it's a case of them understanding it so they can teach them on how to use the app, but be safe. Just like, you know, YouTube, there's a lot of things on YouTube where you can see or view and it's not particularly great, but if you know how to manage it, you'll go to another video, you'll ignore it, you won't be so inquisitive to click on something that can mislead you. Okay.
So does this link in any way with the concept of generational trauma, or is that a separate issue? And again, how do you feel that that's impacting the young people who you're working with?
So the part where the generational trauma links in is underneath the social media, underneath the behaviours of the young people and what we see on the surface. When you unpack it, then you start to see signs in the home, the mentality, the cultural element, that there is generational traumas passed down, whether it's from the parents, the grandparents, and those things are...
Sorry to cut you. Is it possible to give an example of what a generational trauma might look like for people who are not familiar with the term?
Yeah, so a generational trauma is, if your grandparents, in a Caribbean household, a generational trauma would be grandparents being too harsh on their kids, disciplining them. So it would be, putting their hands on their kids in a manner that's traumatizing. So it's not just telling them off and letting them understand. It's using something in a household to hit the child with, and those children are never dealt with it. It was just, you get hit, you go to your room, you cry, and that's it. And that happening over years, then those same parents do that to the kids. But as time goes on and, we get into the year 2000s, you can't actually do that. Like, children have rights. So it's a case of, it then turns into abuse. And then, safeguarding wasn't as strong as it is now. So there's a lot of things that parents are doing where, children are at harm. So that is the generational trauma. So it's something that's passed down, a negative impact on the family that's passed down, that it affects you. Whether you like it or not, well, it's going to affect you.
Okay. So going back to sort of then ways to address it with young people, particularly if they don't themselves understand that that's what's happening to them.
I think it's a case of, so what I like to do is I like to not leave out any link to what I'm trying to deal with. So you'll often find they want you to address the children's behaviours. But what behaviours are, why are the behaviours there? Where does it come from? Learned behaviour is a massive thing. And when you have learned behaviours and you interact with the parents or the families, you can kind of see a bigger picture. And it's a case of accountability. So there's no point, parents just blaming the kids, they're naughty. It's like, hold on a second, where's it come from? What's the reasons? What have you been through that child has seen and now reenacting it in a different way? You just don't understand that they're regulating it in an angry way, they're regulating it in a way where they can't control subconsciously. And that's addressing the generational trauma with the parent where the child is living. And once you can give that parent understanding, they can step back a bit and understand the child and how they respond, so they can respond in a better way instead of responding thinking this child is just doing stuff to annoy me or just to be a child. And it's like, no, there's more than that.
It's interesting because based on what I've heard you say so far, whether we're talking about social media, whether we're talking about the impact of generational trauma, what I'm hearing as a theme in this is how important in order to influence young people and to change the trajectory of their lives, having an involvement with their parents and their families are. I think very often when people think about youth work, they think very much about just the work you're doing with those young people. But it sounds to me that a big part of working with youth is developing the family unit and developing the family understanding of their child and the environment that their child is in.
Yeah, that's totally agreeable. I mean, I think that you have a lot of youth workers and they're doing, a lot of them are doing a fantastic job. But again, it's no child grows up, they're born in the world and grows up and says, I'm just going to be this person. I'm going to do this. I'm going to carry a knife. It doesn't work like that. They're very influential by peers and environments. So that's why it's very important that, each generation is safeguarded so the future generation can be more understood.
Yeah. Sounds like it. You've mentioned there knife crime. Now, obviously that has been an area of key concern, both within communities, but also within the actual, police and crime units as well. What's your approach to dealing with the issue of knife crime, and what do you feel that the approach of all the different parties should be? So you've got one approach, but how does that fit in with what maybe the police should be doing, maybe what parents should be doing, etc.?
This is it's a tricky one, but I'd say that with how I tackle knife crime is a bit unorthodox, because I'm not governed by a strict framework of rules, in a sense where other organisations, government organisations, police, they have to follow, their protocol, the risk of it, and like certain situations where there's a bit of a fear factor. But because I've had that lived experience of a situation where growing up, a lot being surrounded by, just say, other gangs, or those experiences you become numb to. So if I see a group of boys with balaclavas on and they look like they're up to no good or they're just hanging around, I don't have that fear factor of approaching or talking to them, because I see what's underneath. They're normal young boys. They could be just doing that for any reason, like no self-confidence. So I'm going to engage. So when I engage, if someone is carrying a knife and we have that conversation, I can then engage and say to them, why are you carrying a knife? Where are we? What beef do you have? I can have that conversation to change the perspective. So what a lot of organizations, when they don't have that, it's like, okay, they're coming to arrest me or they're coming to stereotype me and judge me instead of find out what's going on. And it kind of creates a big bridge. So that's why it's kind of easier for me to get into the groups of young people to kind of, deter them away from the knife crime. So that's the approach that I have. It's a lived experience approach. And it's about talking to them and giving them perspective of, do you understand what it means to carry a knife? Do you understand what it means to hurt someone with a knife?
Do you feel that young people understand those things?
No, they don't understand. It's like this. If you've, just like social media, I grew up without social media. I grew up without a lot of things. We had music on CDs. Now music is just MP3 on your phone. If you, as a young person, if you grow up without the change, you don't know any different. So when I grew up, a balaclava was, if anyone wore balaclava, it's like, where have you robbed? That's what balaclavas, that's what the purpose is. So now, sports shops sell them. You see them on television. Brand names sell them like it's a pair of trainers. So they've grown up in a world where it's normalized. So what's normalized to them then becomes a normal response. So if they don't know that carrying a knife back in the day meant going to jail, they're just learning it. They're going to pick up their knife and they're going to carry a knife out of protection. That's the first thought. Instead of learning historically what happens to people who carry a knife. So I've had to mentor 9-year-olds who feel like they need to carry a knife. And their first thought about carrying a knife is, I want to protect myself. So it's kind of like they're living in fear. So they don't know anything else before that. Yeah. They hear it, but it's not what protects them and makes them feel safe.
And then there isn't a connection that carrying that knife and potentially protecting themselves in whatever way that looks like could turn into a murder charge.
Exactly. And it's like, it's a similarity. I see it very plain and clear, probably because of that lived experience, but plain and clear, it's just like any adult. Your survival mode will kick in if you are pushed into a corner when your survival is threatened. And any adult wouldn't necessarily, they'll use or try and stop themselves from being stabbed in any situation. So imagine that as a kid. The kids, they're responding in a very human manner, but it's not managed, it's not responding in a mature way. So they're not weighing up the odds. So do I run? Do I get a chair and stop someone from stabbing me? Or do I just take the knife and just stab them? That's their go-to.
Yeah. And what would you say then the role of other groups should be? So let's look at, for example, law enforcement. What's their role in assisting from your point of view when you're dealing with what you say is immature viewpoints really and a lack of understanding? What could law enforcement do?
I think what they need to champion more is being on the side of the cultural understanding. So as much as there's a lot of police out there that do their job very well, and when it comes to, reading their rights and, they've got the evidence and putting away the criminals that need to be put away, also there's an element of that home life and that understanding of the area, that cultural, and they don't understand that. And I guess, like we were just saying, it's like police, their survival is, okay, if there's a group of youth and, culturally they're not understanding that maybe young Black Caribbean boys speak loud and they're comfortable with wearing gold, they're comfortable with wearing a balaclava, because historically, those things, they may look up to their brother, their dad, who's in a similar situation. They just will criminalize them subconsciously and probably want to interfere with them without asking any questions. So it's like there's some police who are not trying to connect because they just, 9 times out of 10, a group of youths are going to be carrying a knife, they've got a balaclava on. And that's where they're, I would say, going wrong in their approach. So that's where they're not helping. Obviously, on the other side of it, the law enforcement side, they're doing what they need to be doing. But it's not just always, because there's been a lot of, stereotypes and arrests where the young people are not doing what they're doing. And also to mention, there's a lot of situations where young people, they get caught with a knife and they just get referred to the yacht and sent back on the street. And it's like, so there's no aftercare. Are you expecting that person to then think that they've got off and go pick up a knife again? Because that's what they do. So it's kind of like, there's been a lot of kids that I'm thinking, so where's the aftercare? It's not just, just let them out. Like, you need to be connect with them more, tell them how serious it is.
Yeah, so there's not much of an education, but then the problem is the stereotyping starts to almost criminalise these young people in a way, but then isn't really tackling where the behaviour or the underlying behaviour is coming from.
Yeah.
What about parents? Because, again, I'm sure there'll be parents that don't necessarily know that their 9-year-old has taken a knife out of the kitchen cupboard and decided they need it to protect themselves.
I mean, this is another situation where I, educate parents, because it's like every adult has a different walk of life. Some are very educated in some areas, some are not so educated. But it's giving yourself the ability and having the awareness to learn. So you're in a home and you could go from 1 child to 4 kids. Some have additional needs. It's a lot on a parent, probably a single parent household. But you have the time to put effort into looking into your own phone, social medias, get in contact with friends. That's the effort that you put in watching programs. But they're not doing that with the kids. Right. They give them the phones or the tablets to shut them up when there's behaviours. That in itself is showing signs of, okay, are you paying attention? Now, if parents paid attention, some parents paid attention to what the kids are looking at and taking on the phone, they'll be able to capture the behaviours from early and then put things in place, like my organisation. And that's what some parents do when they're on the ball. But then, unfortunately, circumstances or, parents can just feel fed up and, distressed, and they don't pay attention to that and they miss that ticket. So it's being more proactive, but that's why I help and educate parents, not here to judge no parents. If you are not educated or you're going through something, you need that help. Get that support, and then, certain light bulbs will switch on quicker when you're more put together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking that you've also done some work in schools?
Yeah.
In doing that work within the schools, is that another place where there is an opportunity to create interventions and to create understanding? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, school, they always focused on secondary school, but I focus on primary as well for the last year and a half. Because like you said, a 9-year-old, I've had loads of referrals to 9-year-olds. They are the new generation that are influenced by everything. So they, in one sense, in the schools, they need to make sure they're nurturing these young people. Like we were saying 2-3 years ago was COVID. Those young people who are being arrested, the 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, for knife crime incidents or behaviours and youth violence, in COVID, they were out of school. So year 5 and 6, where were those kids? They were being neglected because of COVID, nurturing, they were under stress. A lot of things happened in the home because everyone was at home. They lost out on a lot of stuff. So if they've lost out, they're like 2 years behind a growth. So their choices are really scattered at the moment. And primary schools is definitely a place where I'm working, and I think they are doing a lot. But I believe when the behaviours can't get managed and they get excluded and go to like alternative provisions, PRUs, that's when the downhill spiral happens, because you've got young people who have minor behaviours mixed with young people with high violent behaviours, high autistic needs, high ADHD needs. And some kids go into, and this is from my experience, a lot of kids actually go into these schools one way, and then they learn things from other kids and become the worst versions of themselves because they can get away with it, because the rules are a bit more, there's not much as a structure in the PRUs and the APs as like school. So in sitting down behind your desk, not every child needs to do that. It depends on how they learn. So where there's a good sense of those schools are good because you learn in a different style, it can easily, the loophole is, children learn bad behaviours and then become worse, which they don't even want to do, but it's a place where they influenced again. Yeah.
So it's a huge issue really, and I can see why it requires so much to tackle it. From the perspective of your organisation, you're obviously doing a lot with young people, with schools, with parents. What would you say is needed? What would you need more of as an organisation in order to have a greater impact in something that is clearly a huge amount of work, really?
I would say, so from my personal experience, what I would say growth-wise, I'm only one man and can't be everywhere. So what I plan to do is have different locations. So I'm mobile at the moment. So I'll go from Dudley to Sandwell to Wolverhampton to Walsall to Birmingham, in the schools, whether it's at community centres, different places to access those safe spaces for kids to come and receive mentoring. Having hubs, having something where they can come to in different areas, that's something I'm working on and definitely will elevate what I'm doing. In terms of growth, I think it's mainly just having that more of a solid connection with the powers that be higher government level, having that voice at the table, to sit down like how we're having a conversation, to actually listen to the front line rather than just hearing it through the grapevine and just making an assessment based on that, actually having that conversation and talking to the young people themselves. I mean, if any, MP or someone that wanted to have a conversation, I've got access to loads of young people that will talk because they trust me and I've built that relationship, but it's a distant kind of thing at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned politics because, we've got a relatively new government at the moment. There's an opportunity for a lot of things to maybe change or for approaches to change. Are you optimistic about sort of the future of our youths?
Not really into the politics, but I do, from growing up and having Labour in power for many years, I can see where it's helped, especially growing up, it's helped the Caribbeans with a lot of stuff. I can see where their agenda, part of their agenda will be like to help more. But I understand it's going to be a tough time clearing up certain things that didn't help society and to get it in place. So in that time, again, being a voice, my voice being a part of that change will be amazing because it helps longevity-wise. Because, if you're accessing organisations like myself and really making change, that's a whole area, a whole family, and getting like the database of young people who I work with to vote for those same people that they've sat down and had a conversation with.
That's a good point, actually, in terms of how they engage. And then they go, well, young people don't vote, but are you speaking to them and are you trying to build a relationship? Now, Malachi, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, and to understand more of the dynamic that goes behind the work that you're doing. You're obviously doing fantastic work. It's very much needed. And hopefully for the leaders that are sitting and listening to this podcast, what they're hearing is that, it's time for them to welcome you to a seat around their table in order to really gain access to these young people and therefore to have ways to access solutions for them.
Yeah, definitely.
No, thank you. That's been fantastic. Thank you for tuning in to another Leading Communities podcast. I do hope that from this episode you've been able to understand a lot more about the experiences of young people right now, particularly within inner cities and within our communities, and to recognise that actually the solutions to supporting them are already in place, but those solutions do need to be facilitated by the right people in the right places with the right power to maybe put and to streamline policies that can really make a difference for organisations like like Ambitious Lives CIC and others of that nature to really create an impact in the young people's lives that they're working with. Please do join us again for the next one. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to keep up to date with all things leading communities.